Okay, I think we're going. Steve Saylor is there. Hi,
Hey,
Steve. Christy Lou is there.
Hey,
Hi,
Christy.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We're playing in the key of G today. Hope you're playing there with us. This is not a concert. If it were a concert, there would be more than just one key featured, among other things. There's 16 people in the jam room already.
Yay.
Terry
Welcome.
Burdick is watching with us. Hi,
Hey,
Terry.
Terry.
Let's see. Checking the thread here just once more. All right.
So do we want to do any disclaimers or anything like that to start with?
No, not yet.
No.
Not yet. Just
Okay.
that we'll be in G the whole time, and we've got a list of tunes that we've prepared for you, and we hope you like the selection. Some more familiar, others less familiar.
Some of them a little squirrely.
Yes, a little squirrely. All right, but we're going to ease everyone into the experience with something we figured most people would know, a little bit of The Girl I Left Behind.
But not the Raina Gellert version.
No, not the Raina Gellert one, just the ordinary one, which is a nice tune. All right, Girl I Left Behind, not too terribly fast, and hopefully this will set the pace for the rest of the session. music camps and supervise those big jam sessions that are typical of music camps, and I'm always thinking the key of G probably isn't a great sociable key for music camp jams because a lot of the repertoire is kind of obscure, but then I think of tunes like that, and maybe Girl I Left Behind goes in other keys too, but I've always noted in G, and I bet there aren't too many old-time musicians out there who haven't heard Girl I Left Behind and wouldn't be able to play along. So
well, the one that Raina did got so popular for a while that this one kind of got pushed back.
That's true.
And stuff, but this one is a perfectly lovely tune.
I think it's a great tune. All right, everyone able to see and hear properly? Any problems? Let us know. Steve Allerton is there. Jan Douglas, hello. Sue Gimbel tuning in from Morgantown. Hey, Sue. All right. Nice to have some company out there in the peanut gallery. Rita Scott tuning in.
Hey,
Rita. Terry says, lovely and not played enough. Thanks for agreeing, Terry. That's pretty much the way we felt about it. Tony Kreindler just popping in. Great.
Oh, hey, Tony.
All right. Let's move along into somewhat less common territory.
Well, let's do a couple of disclaimers.
Disclaimers.
First.
Okay.
All right. Number one.
Yeah, this is important.
Well, they're all important. With some questions, we get this question a lot, especially before we do the jams. These jams don't go away. I mean, you can participate with it tonight, but they stay on Adam's Facebook page in perpetuity for now, anyway.
Yep.
And if you want to go back and listen and play along, they'll be there whenever you like.
We love hearing from people who utilize these after the fact to learn tunes or to just practice more playing along when you have the ability to pause and rewind, which you don't during the live stream.
Right. And so that's something. Let's see. We get requests when we announce these jams. And we... Sometimes the things that are requested, for example, this time around Waynesboro was requested because it is in G, but we have done that one before. So,
we're trying to not repeat anything that we've done in these online jams yet.
So, and then there were a couple other requests that we didn't know, so we can't really play the ones we don't know. And but we might work up to it eventually. Yeah,
if we announce the jams a little farther in advance, we might be able to learn some tunes for them. But so far we had to go with our pre-existing repertoire, right?
Right, and whether you can tell or not, we actually do practice for nearly a week before we do these.
We do.
Try to make them sound reasonable.
We do.
The third disclaimer is that it's really important to know, and you talk about this in terms of official theory and stuff, there's multiple ways to chord a tune. Multiple. And tell them theory-wise what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, a lot of chords sound good against the melodies that the fiddle plays. And it's not even that there is one acceptable way for old-time music and other ways that sound good but may not be acceptable for old-time music. I think there are a lot of acceptable chord progressions for old-time music. And we just pick the progressions that we like. It's not the way to chord these tunes. It's a way.
We've had enough comments on this that I feel real need to speak to this every time. This is just our preference based on what goes with what the fiddle is doing.
Yep.
If you don't like it, you pick your preference.
Absolutely.
But this is just what we do, and we're not saying it's cast in stone. Feel free to mess around with it.
Yeah.
And so that, and then I think that's all. Do you know any more disclaimers?
No, I think those are enough.
Okay. Well, the next tune, I'm going to say something about this. So when I was first learning, I don't know where this tune came from, and I don't know where I learned it, but when I was first learning, this tune was one of the hottest G tunes there was, and then it went away.
It sure did.
It disappeared. And when I say hot, I mean popular. It is not a peppy tune, and that is one of the ways to me that this tune is classified. Is every time I play this tune, I think it's loping. The rhythm is lope, lope, lope. It's not dance fast or breakneck fast or anything. I don't think you clog to it or anything. But it's just a very pleasant. They have Sunday afternoon buzz with your beer, kind of thing, kind of tune that sounds great at a time like that in a laid back jam session.
Yeah.
Okay.
The tune is called Cuffy. Cuffy. And this tune, interestingly enough, was collected not so far from where we're sitting right now. It was collected by Armand Barnett in the Rocky Mount, Virginia area, which is like 40 miles northwest of us. Yeah, sure enough. It's a unique tune, and I wish I knew more about it.
But remember, it is not a fast tune.
No.
It's not a waltz or anything like that, but it's much better tune if you play it very, like you're riding a Tennessee walking horse or something. Yeah.
So we're going to try and take it at a laid-back pace, too. Cuffy, hope you enjoy it.
you better check and see if we're
See what people have to say. All right. A lot of nice people tuning in. Hello.
What's being said?
Just lots of nice things, lots of people watching with us. Karen Warren loves your guitar playing.
Aww.
Thanks, Karen.
Karen, I pretty much would appreciate having you here right this minute.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would be fun.
Yeah.
All right, let's move over to Kentucky for a few tunes. The first one is going to take, I think, some slow demonstration if it's a tune you don't already know. This is Shippingport. Shippingport. There are a lot of interesting versions of this tune out there, but we only know the one that we know, and this is not a crooked version. A crooked one seems to have gotten into vogue here in the festival scene over the past number of years with a short B part that never made a lot of sense to me, so we just do the squared up one. The A part there's nothing to, really, but then the B part has a lot of quick changes, and it starts on the 4 chord.
But it's interesting, it's much less chords than you think it's going to be the first time you hear it.
That's true.
That's what always screwed me up when I was trying to learn it, because I thought it had a whole lot of chords in it, but it doesn't. It just holds, the standard term progression, the standard 1, 4, 5. That just holds them a little bit longer, but it makes it sound like there's multiple chords in it that aren't there.
Right.
So think less is more.
Right, and start on the 4 chord for the B part. So we're going to do 4, 1, 5 to start. This is just demonstration.
I'm
Let's
sorry.
try that again.
I'm not sure what we're doing.
The B part of Shippingport.
Okay. I gotta get in my head.
Do you remember that?
All right. Okay.
Uh-huh. On the 4 chord?
Other 4.
Other 4?
Other 4.
That 4. 1,
Sorry,
2, 3.
we did practice.
You'll have many chances to get it now that we really play it. It's weird to play that without the A part ahead, though, isn't it?
I don't know if you guys are like me, but I'm telling you, if that melody is not running in my head, it does not come out of my hand. So, and that's what was going on.
Well,
okay. Are you ready?
Yeah.
practice for days and it still,
Right.
crash and burn when
Well,
you're not least expecting it.
For me, everything changes as soon as the camera goes
I know
on.
it.
Everything changes.
It's terrible.
Everything
It's terrible.
changes. I don't know if fiddlers out there who get nervous playing in front of people have the experience that I do, but it feels like I'm going to drop my bow at any moment. So I'm kind of trying to hold it in all of these new, more secure ways, which is stupid. I should hold it in the way that I'm used to and just trust that it's not going to drop, but it doesn't feel that way. So I'm just constantly maneuvering it around, and it's not getting any better. And that doesn't even explain what goes wrong in my left hand.
So, hey, we're not perfect by any means. That's for sure.
Nope. All right.
And that one thing that was going on with that, I think, is important to be cognizant of when you're playing that particular tune. It tends to speed up in the B part
With all those quick changes.
With the quick changes, and it's really hard to keep it corralled. So it's easier when you play it faster.
Yeah,
It
I
really
suppose
is.
so.
So anyway, think about that when you're playing it.
All right,
And
let's
don't
play
drop your
something.
bow.
No, I'm
Don't
not
drop your
dropping the
bow.
bow. Don't drop your guitar either.
Don't miss the 4 chords.
Let's play something a little more relaxed,
Okay.
shall we?
Talk about it.
Old Billy Hell. Isn't that a great title?
You just wanted to say that.
I
because-
did.
Yeah, you did.
I did. Old Billy Hell, also from Kentucky. This one comes specifically from Estill Bingham over there, if you've listened to that wonderful old recording, I think from the 70s, maybe. This tune has a little bit of crookedness in the B part, but nothing that you'll be too frightened by.
You're talking about the timing where it goes da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
It says da-da-da-da.
Exactly.
Like that.
So the A
Yeah.
part is half length. What I just played was one A. Here comes another A. And then I think of the next 2 beats as kind of a bridge to the B part. Not really belonging to either part, it's just a transition. And Beth is going to stay on the 1 chord through that transition, just ride the G. And then the B part to both of us really starts on the 5 chord. 1, 4, 5, 1. And then here's the same bridge when I get ready to repeat it. And that, again, sort of belongs to neither part in my estimation, neither the part ahead of it nor the part following it. It's just a transition that happens to have some length to it. And then we have an identical B, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1, and then no strange transition as we get ready for the A part again. So if you try to focus the B part around that 5 chord when you first hear it, to me that's the top
Da,
of the
da, da, da,
Yeah,
da,
and then
da,
you're
da, da.
you're kind of free from having to worry about crookedness until the next B part gets ready to happen.
Right.
Blah blah blah. Let's just play this and see what happens. If people don't get it, they can revisit the video.
And you
later
can tell
on.
us to pipe down, in the comments.
Right. love that. You'd expect a sweeter title for such a sweet tune. Maybe he was a nice guy. I don't know. All right, people having fun out there? Are you playing along? I hope you're playing and not just listening.
The more you play along, the less you hear us blow it.
That's right. The more you play along, the better we can imagine us sounding.
Right.
All right. John from Stillwater, Minnesota. See you next weekend at the Bluff Country Gathering.
Yay!
Yes, looking forward to that.
Yay.
Sure am. All right. Marcia Harris, hello.
Hey, Marcia.
Marcia's playing guitar this time, not dulcimer.
Uh-oh. Marcia, let me know if I need to keep my fingers a little more on the chord. I'm really bad about that, so if I'm wiggling my fingers too much, let me know.
Speak right up if you need help. Okay, staying put in Kentucky for one more, at least for this round. This has become a favorite of ours as we've prepared for the jam. It's one that we've played for a while, but not very often. Brickyard Joe. Anybody out there know Brickyard Joe? Brickyard Joe, I learned from the playing of Doc Roberts of Kentucky, from that wonderful old recording. And I've heard a lot of people play this as just a two-part tune, but he let a third part creep in, like maybe just once on that recording. It certainly wasn't every time or even every other time. And that part is really fun to play, and it's really cool sounding. So I like to include it, but again, not every time, but not randomly either, because that's not a very sociable way to play. So we're going to do our best to include the third part every other time round. And if I mess up and play it when I'm not supposed to, or don't play it, or whatever, it doesn't really affect Beth, because the chord setup for that third part is the same as the chord setup for the A and B parts. But I will try to get into that pattern so that I don't lose any of the melody makers out there.
I want to say something about that. So guitar players, it is, and banjo players, right? It is your job to follow whatever the fiddle does.
Right.
So
even if the fiddle does weird
the fiddle
things.
is screwing up, you go where he goes. So
right.
And eventually he or she will get it back.
That's right.
So that's why it's really good not to be cast in stone about what you're going to play. Ben Flippin was terrible about that.
Oh dear.
Oh, he would play one part over and over and over and over and over, and you never knew when he was going to stop and go into the B part and stuff like that. So yeah, so it's a great lesson in paying attention to your fiddle.
That's right. I like to think that I'm pretty good at playing parts twice, the way that they normally go, not just once or three times or whatever. But don't quote me on any of this. All right, Brickyard Joe, super fun tune to play. felt good to end on the B part for me. Sorry, it's always felt good to end on the A part. So have to figure out when to call last time on that one to get us all ending on the proper part, but not the expected part, perhaps.
Follow the fiddler.
Something like that. I'm exhausted already.
It's been one of those kind of weekends.
Steve Allerton is marking timestamps. Hilarious.
Oh. Well, that's nice.
Sue is out there. Sue McKay from Toronto.
Hi,
Excellent.
Sue.
Great. Christina Tift playing along. How wonderful.
If you guys are like us, we're trying to get ourselves in shape for festival seasons and camp seasons starting up. So we're kind of not, tip-top condition here.
Not always. It's been a long winter, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm. And long pandemic.
Yep. Say, banjo players out there, how are you tuned to play along in the key of G? I'm just curious, and maybe others of us are curious too. I know how I would be tuned if I were playing the banjo in this jam, but I don't get to play banjo today. So let me know how you're tuned. Let each other know how you're tuned. Could be a fun discussion there in the wings. All right, we're going to play a little bit more common tune. I think of this as a more common tune. Do you think of it as very common? No?
No, not really.
Neither common nor uncommon?
Yeah.
All right, whatever. Billy in the Lowland. Not to be confused with Billy in the Low Ground, the C tune. This is the G tune. I've only ever heard it in G. It comes from Henry Reedy of Virginia, and it's a very pleasant tune indeed. Does this have the E minor in it?
I can't remember till we start playing. Yes. Yes, it has the E minor. Yeah.
E minor.
Thank you.
I think it has a little bit more E minor in the B part as well, but otherwise just 1, 4, and 5. We try to give you warnings if there are any unlikely chords coming your way. All right, Billy in the Lowland. Here we go. Do people out there think of that as a somewhat commonly played G tune?
I
I'm
don't.
curious. You don't. But there really aren't that many commonly played G tunes. So, I don't know. Relatively speaking, maybe it's more common than some.
Well, back talking about common tunes and stuff, one of the reasons that Adam had a really hard time learning Cuffy was because and I had to wait away from it to say this, or it would really confuse him. It's because it sounds so much like Magpie, which is a really common G tune, or used to be, that it took you forever to separate them.
I know it,
yeah.
and I play them both, and I know that they're not the same tune, but knowing which one is which is sometimes more than I can handle.
Yeah.
All right. Let's play something very different.
Yes.
A little bit more upbeat, but not necessarily fast. Just has a brighter sound. This is the Kansas City Rag. Really fun tune to play. I learned this from Brad Leftwich, and a lot of people around Missouri played and recorded it. I don't remember the fiddler that Brad said he learned it from, but Brad is a beautiful source in my estimation, and we're going to try and do him some justice. Kansas City Rag has 3 parts, and the progression of chords is very similar across all 3 of them, but not quite the same, so watch out.
that one a rag?
It's a rag in name only.
In name
I always
only,
tell
yeah.
people that's not a rag by my definition at all, and I have a pretty loose definition of rags.
Yeah.
No, it's just a tune, but it's a nice one. That one always makes me happy.
Yeah.
All right, people out there talking about banjo tunings, I'm curious.
It's a test.
Might have to scroll a little farther back.
Oh, poo.
Well,
You'll find out later.
I'll find out later. Oh, yeah, some people are talking about the Sandy River Bell tuning. Well, that's a relief. Thanks, y'all. Excellent. Excellent.
And maybe some of them are not even your students.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Not
right.
all of them are.
Right.
Not all of them are.
But the next one is called "Joke on the Guitar Player." It's not
Rice straw.
rye straw. It's
No.
not, but it is definitely a joke on the guitar player. So,
Mhm.
if I make it through this without a crash and burn at least once,
Right.
we shall see.
Here's another one where I think a slow demonstration
Slow
would be
demo.
helpful. This is
That's
going to
what-
be Indian Nation. And there are a few different tunes called Indian Nation in the canon. This is the one from the Hammonds family, and I think from Burl Hammonds specifically. And some fiddlers would tune the E string down to D to play this tune. That's a really fun way to do it. If you want to go to that trouble while we're doing this slow demo of one of the parts, feel free, but I'm going to keep mine tuned up to E just to save a little bit of time and trouble. Beautiful tune, and even though the A part's chord progression is quite challenging and counterintuitive indeed, you get to breathe a sigh of relief once you enter the B part.
Yeah, the B part's
There's
not
like
a problem.
nothing going
But
on
the
in
A
the B
part-
All right, so here's another one of these tunes that doesn't start on the 1 chord. It starts on the 5 chord, and there's a lot of back and forth from 5 to
1.
something else. And it's usually to 1, but it's
5.
sometimes to 4.
5 to 1, 5 to 4,
Uh-huh.
5 to 1, like that.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. So it specifically 5-1, 5-4, 5-1, 5-1. That's the first half of the part. Then 5-1, 5-4 again, and then I don't remember.
I don't
what
remember
happens at
either.
the
Yeah,
end.
get
I
in the
guess
middle
we'll
of it.
find out.
But the B part's a lot more intuitive. So.
Right. All right. Nice and slow. Just
Okay.
the A part. 1, 2, 3.
No.
All right, so that's the A part, and then the B part is all 1, and then quick 5-to-1 turnarounds at the end. That's it. Shall we play this?
Play the B part?
No.
No.
No, just the A part.
All right.
Well, just the whole thing now.
Just the whole
A
thing,
is
all
all that needed demonstrating, and we won't take it too fast.
No, we can't. Take it too fast, you really lose it.
Right. And don't
So-
be fooled by the potatoes I'm getting ready to play still in G, because it really is getting
Starts on the
ready to
D.
start on
Starts
the
on the
chord.
D.
All right.
not make it all the way through
It's
without
tongue twister.
without the tongue twisting the wrong way.
Yeah, it's okay. Fun to play though, isn't it? And it kind of makes sense once you get that progression on autopilot.
But your muscle memory fights you.
It sure
the
does.
whole time you're trying to play it.
Well, maybe if the tune were in D, if the
Yeah.
other part kind of oriented around D, your muscle memory wouldn't be fighting
Wouldn't
so
screw up
hard.
as bad, but boy does it ever with this one.
Uh-huh. All right. Speaking of the Hammonds family, we're going to do another one. This one is specifically from Burl Hammonds. It's become a real favorite of mine lately, and I hope other people out there like it too. It's the Forks of Reedy. I think it's kind of a prototypical G tune, but it's still got some interesting aspects, and it's just super fun to play. It's sort of like some tunes called Forks of Sandy, and I think some of those might occasionally be called Three Forks of Sandy. It is not like Three Forks of Cheat. Don't be confused.
I always find myself though thinking that they're always about food.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because they're about forks.
Okay.
And it takes me a minute. I'm not kidding. That's the way my brain thinks.
That's
Oh,
hilarious.
it's a food song. No, it's not. No, it's not. No.
No, I guess it's a river or a stream or a creek
well, we
tune,
don't say like-
right?
Well, we don't. We don't play anything about spoons or knives.
We don't.
Yeah, whatever.
Maybe we should.
Yeah.
I'll search Slippery Hill for
right.
spoon and knife and see if anything comes
Comes
up.
up, right.
But if I search for fork, a lot of things.
A
will
lot of
come up.
things. They like to write about what the rivers did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
All right, but this is the Forks of Reedy from Burl Hammonds, and we hope you have fun playing along with it. We sure like this one. Forks of Reedy. Just love that one. Anybody out there know that already or like to play it as much as I do?
I wish I'd gotten to meet Burl. I was lucky enough I got to meet Sherman Hammonds and Maggie Hammonds, the singer, and they were really special people.
Yeah.
Really handsome people. Good looking.
Yeah. It's
Good
fun to
looking
look at
people.
photos of them. Interesting comment here from Sue Gimble. She identified a knife tune. We were talking about forks and spoons and knives. Barlow knife.
Oh, there you go.
And it's even in G. We should have thought of that. Thanks, Sue.
Thank
Maybe
you.
the next time we do a G jam. That's hilarious. We actually played a couple different Barlow knives.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Any spoon tunes out there?
Yeah, I think a spoon too.
Not playing spoons.
No.
There used to be a woman in Southwest Virginia who would come around to jam sessions at fiddlers conventions and offer to play her spoons on your back.
If you were the fiddler.
Oh, only fiddlers?
No, I never.
You never had spoons
I never had
played
it happen
on
to
you?
me. No.
Interesting.
Yeah, but she would play them right on your back.
Mm-hmm.
That extra percussive
Yep.
sound of the spoon on flesh.
Yep.
Not
Not everyone was happy to see her coming, as I recall.
No, I don't think so. And someone.
All right, we're going to play a crooked tune here, and it's pretty weird, I think, but it's been circulating a lot these past few years, so we thought it was maybe safe to play. This is Old Aunt Jenny with Her Nightcap On, another one from Estill Bingham of Kentucky. Beautiful, beautiful tune. The A part, there's nothing to it. I think of it as like 4 short things, not crooked, just half-length parts, identical to each other. But then when we get into the B part, it gets a little bit stranger, and there are some extra beats in there. But nothing you can't handle. There are lots of ways that I've heard this tune chorded.
Is this the Dan Geller?
This is.
I can't keep the titles.
This
straight.
is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, lots of ways I've heard this tune
Well, actually,
chorded.
it would be coming from Deb, right? So much.
Well,
The
she was the one
guitar.
playing the chords, but he
Okay.
was the one dictating them.
Got it.
We learned this chord progression that we're about to use from Dan Gellert. So it's the Dan Gellert authorized chord progression to Old Aunt Jenny with Her Nightcap On. And if that's not good enough to call the standard for the chord progression of this tune, I don't know what would be. And here's the thing, I love it accompanied with these chords. I love it almost as well with one E minor in place of one 4 chord that Beth is going to play. The E minor is not in the Dan Gellert authorized progression, so we're not going to use it. I don't enjoy any of the other progressions that I've heard used. I really, really don't. They're all just a little too choppy. This is a nice, smooth, flowing progression. Yeah. It helps me make better sense of the crookedness in the B part. Mm-hmm. And so if you've never heard the tune chorded this way, see what you think of it. If you've never been able to wrap your mind around this tune, see whether the flow of the chord progression helps you make better sense of it.
Right. And we must give credit to, it may be the Dan Gellert authorized version, but I learned it.
You learned it from Deb Posey's guitar playing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You got to give credit where credit's due for guitar players.
Yes, the Dan and Deb chord
the
progression.
Dan and Deb chord progression. Yes.
Okay. All right. Old Aunt Jenny with Her Nightcap On. thanks to Dan Gellert and Deb Posey for that wonderful chord progression that I don't think we ever would have come up with.
Yeah.
So fun. All right, we're going to play two more numbers. If you're interested and inspired, we have a tip jar pinned to the top of the comment thread, and I think also in the title of the post of this jam.
And remember that jam will stay up on Adam's Facebook page. You just go to your videos section, right?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I wish they were easier to find than this, but they're not that hard to find because I don't post many videos other than these jams. So go to my page, click on photos, and then look in thumbnail view for anything where I'm starting out kind of like this, up close to the screen, looking for the button to press. Yeah, they all look the same. And you won't mistake those for still photographs. And you also won't mistake them for edited videos. Right?
Because we don't edit them,
No,
do we?
not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. All right, this is a tune that we're pretty excited about, too, that we haven't heard many people play. Did you want to send this out to anyone?
No, I don't want to send it out to anybody. I don't want to say that we're sending it out, but we sort of set a little goal for ourselves for the next time we encounter this friend of ours who says this is the most nothing tune they have ever heard.
Right.
And so we're going to try to spring it on them and convince them that that's not really accurate.
Yeah, maybe change their mind.
Change their mind.
All right, so it's a tune called Walk Along John. Not to be confused with Walk Along John to Kansas. That goes in A. This is just Walk Along John. And it seems to be common to like the Ozark area. I found on Slippery Hill a bunch of different recordings of it. Many from Missouri, but many also from Arkansas, and at least one from Oklahoma. And they were all kind of the same tune. But none of them had quite the B part that I learned. I recognized the A part in all of them, and I recognized aspects of the B part. See, I learned this tune from Bobby Taylor of West Virginia, who always likes to put his own unique spin on even the most common tunes. And he sort of reimagined the B part of this tune in the most wonderful way. So, nothing to the A part on any instrument, really. B part orients around the E minor, which is true of all of those Slippery Hill recordings as well. That wasn't a Bobby Taylor change. But the melody and the structure of the B part from Bobby is different from what I was hearing on any of those Slippery Hill recordings. If you recognize this version from any place else, let me know in the comments where you know it from. I'd love to know more about the tune, other than that it just kind of sprang fully formed from Bobby Taylor's forehead, right? Walk Along John, not to Kansas.
Right.
And I have to remember... There it is. Yeah. All right, so B part number 1, E minor. Then G, kind of an unlikely resolution. E minor. And then this 4, 5 to 1 turnaround. And then B part number 2 replaces that G in the middle of the part with what?
With a B minor. And the way that I'm playing B minor in this situation is, those of you who know a B7, which starts on the D string in the first fret, and then it's 1, 2, 3, like that. And then you just pick up this finger. And I think we've talked about this in previous jams.
Yeah, we used this a couple jams ago.
So it's A, G, E, all on the second fret.
Or you can think of alternating strings, open, closed, open, closed, open, closed, and the closed are all at the second fret.
But without this finger, because B7 was a chord that I learned a really long time ago, so to me, I just hit a B7 and lift my finger.
Yep.
To do it.
And if you know a different way to play B minor, if
Feel
you'd like to
free.
borrow for
This
it,
is-
feel free. This is just the one that we like.
This is just one we do, and also talk about the little bit of off time or whatever right there. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
bit punctuated sounding.
It's a little,
where that chord
yeah.
comes in.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Just thought we'd mention that since that shape probably isn't familiar to some of you
Yeah.
watching. Let's try that some more. Walk
Okay.
along, John. Taylor. Let us know if you recognize that B part from any other source, please.
Pretty strange.
All right. Last but not least.
See if any commentary
Yes.
we need to be aware of.
Anybody need anything before we close out with our last number? Robin Willis is tuning in from Rhode Island. Hello, Robin.
Hey, Robin.
Holly says Violet Hemsley tune. Right, I did find a recording of her playing that tune, yes, but again with a little bit different B part, and I wish I could know if this B part comes from someone before Bobby Taylor, but it's a great tune, and if you want to hear a bunch of really cool renditions of it, search for it on Slippery Hill. All right. Yeah, I think we're good. Definitely not a nothing tune, John Reddick says. Thanks, John, for that. We agree. I just was shocked to hear this friend say what a nothing tune it was.
No, we'll see. We're determined to like spring it on the person.
At Cliff Top in a jam or something.
In a jam, and then see what the reaction is.
Right.
No title.
Yeah, right. We'll just play
title.
it and see if the person recognizes it or likes it or
Yeah.
both. Who all's coming to Cliff Top? Let us know in the comments. We're going to be there. Can't wait. This is probably going to be our last jam of the season now that festivals are starting to happen. Festivals and camps.
October.
Yeah, I think we'll try and start them up again in the fall. We like this off-season thing. If y'all are still interested in the idea of online jams.
Please let us know because, the pandemic is over.
Right.
And no more free tests.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, interesting.
And from.
Well.
And so, it's not as much reason for us to do it
no.
as we started.
And yet, I think we've all learned from these weird COVID times that we're coming out of that there's really something wonderful about online events that offer access to people who otherwise wouldn't have any means of participating. And we hear from a lot of people who tune into these jams, I hear from a lot of people who tune into my online workshops, that they're just not within driving distance of an in-person old-time jam. Or they wouldn't be able to get the time off work to travel to a music camp or a banjo workshop or something in real life. And so people like that is a lot of what has inspired us to keep this going, even as many of the other online jam series seem to have quieted down. So let us know if this is still a nice opportunity for you all.
And if you're like us, we live, it takes us at least an hour to drive to
old-time musicians we enjoy playing with.
Yeah, somebody to have tunes with. So if you're like us and you don't want to drive an hour at night, and back, then it's kind of for that reason as well. But do let us know because we don't want to impose.
No, and if there are times of day or evening that are better or worse for people, let us know that too. If you'd like any adjustments to the format of these jams, which we've kind of settled on, but we're certainly happy to change, let us know that too.
It's real helpful to us to know how to plan and so on.
Absolutely. All right, this last number.
Not talk as much.
Yeah, is it talking too much? I don't know. It feels not so much like a jam session at a music camp, but more like a jam session under our tarp at Cliff Top, where there is conversation.
Right, but you can't tell if they're doing a hairy eyeball because they've been talking too much.
That's true.
Right.
We're getting ready to close with a version of Paddy on the Turnpike that might not be like what you expect to hear under that title. This is Sarah Armstrong's Paddy on the Turnpike. And since this is a Pennsylvania tune, we'll send this out to one of our favorite Pennsylvanians who was watching earlier. I don't know if he's still out there. Alex Brown, wonderful banjo player, wonderful musician of all sorts. Well, we can send it out to Christy Lou too, but Alex Brown is really into Pennsylvania music.
Oh, I see.
Not just a Pennsylvanian himself. Any other Pennsylvanians out there, we can send this out to you.
Right.
All right.
Central Pennsylvania?
Who?
Sarah Armstrong.
Yeah, sort of West Central.
West Central.
Hope you enjoyed our selection of G tunes tonight. Hope you really were playing along and not just listening. It's a whole lot more fun for us to imagine 63 people at the moment jamming along with us.
Sure hope that we've helped get you ready for the season and got your repertoire built up a little bit.
Absolutely.
And, so you know that you can play your way, or you follow the fiddler if you don't want to get hollered at.
Always a good rule to follow.
Always a good rule.
Yeah.
And we hope everyone has a good summer, and we hope we see a lot of you.
Yep, looking forward to seeing some people at Bluff Country Gathering in Minnesota real soon, Midwest Banjo Camp shortly thereafter, Clifftop later on in the summer. We'll see what else ends up on our calendar.
No Mount Airy for us.
No Mount Airy. We're going to be at Banjo Camp instead.
Banjo Camp. But anyway, everyone have a great summer, and see you in the fall.
All right. Be well, everyone. I'm getting ready to finish the live stream. Here we go. Bye.